Dear Shraddhavan, dear friends, I feel deeply humbled for two reasons, for many reasons. Two reasons. We are all very far from the ideal of yoga that Mother and Shraddha have set before us. It is also true that none of us can speak about yoga. And the only way that one can really understand it is by taking a plunge into it. I know that some of us, myself included, have been talking about the path. But the real joy is in walking the path. No amount of book reading about what swimming is can really give us, even if you read the most elaborate details of the physiology of swimming, the benefit it gives us, the calories burnt and everything cannot give us the joy of once taking a plunge into the sea. And when the sea is none else but the consciousness of the mother, and the effort required is nothing less and nothing more than the joy of surrender, then all that one can say is that one is speechless before the wonder that yoga unveils to all of us. I don't know, I've been like, when this issue of speaking on Aurobindo's yoga came up, there were two thoughts which came to my mind. One is that really, can we really speak about yoga? The second thought was that what else is there to speak about? Because to my limited understanding, anything that Aurobindo and the mother have written, if you really want to understand it in the true sense, we have to practice yoga. There is no other way to truly understand. Even a simple thing like the ideal of human unity, education, all the seed ideas which are there, which are the, as we can say, the crux of the matter, we cannot understand, live them, unless we are engaged with yoga in one way or the other. Just not possible. So I thought that instead of, it's a very good idea, we are all infants and we all babble, but maybe when we babble together, probably like everything else, she will teach us and lead us on the way. In the Life Divine, about 100 years back, when the world was engaged with one of the fierce wars, and darkness, distrust, lack of hope, skepticism, denial of God was everywhere, almost everywhere. Aurobindo was writing the earliest preoccupation of man in his awakened thoughts is also his inevitable and ultimate preoccupation. For it returns after the longest period of banishment and denial, survives the longest period of skepticism, and returns after every banishment and denial. What is that earliest preoccupation? It says divination of Godhead, search for pure truth and unmixed bliss, the sense of a secret immortality. The earliest formula of wisdom also promises to be the last. The very first thing that strikes us is that yoga is not new. It is as ancient as man himself. In fact, it seems, as a psychologist I could say, that probably man is made actually for yoga and for nothing else. Because nothing else can satisfy him. He cannot be satisfied with the life of mere animality. He cannot be content even if he were to have the splendor of the gods. There is something in him extremely restless. In one of his poems, Aurobindo says, "There is a need within the soul of man. The splendors of the surface never sate. For life and mind and their glory and debate are the slow prelude to a vaster theme, a preface to the epic supreme." So, the story of man is an unfinished tale. It is a preface. And there is something in us, extremely restless. Human beings innately like to break rules. I don't know whether it's the right place to talk about it or not, but there is something in us. You make a rule of nature, forget about rules made outside. Rule of nature, we want to break it. We want to exceed ourselves. We want to explore the limits. We want to transcend them. This is there in man from childhood, it's ingrained. And there is no known way that we can really fulfill this innate urge unless we engage in yoga. Because essentially behind all these seekings and strivings and hopes and frustrations and expectations, there is this striving that one day we will arrive at some kind of an absolute of truth, an absolute of bliss, an absolute of love, an absolute of freedom, an absolute of perfection. So yoga is ingrained in man. He is programmed in such a way that he cannot rest till he engages himself with yoga. That we are not conscious of it. We know Aurobindo has spoken that there is a long phase, preparatory phase, before we try out all kinds of things and we learn and grow, and a time comes that we are ready for a conscious yoga. The only difference is that we either do a subconscious yoga or a conscious yoga. But in a still deeper sense, if we go to the roots of the word yoga, we find that yoga is even more ancient than man. In fact, yoga is more ancient than the root of our hills. That's how Aurobindo puts it so beautifully in one of his powerful passages. It's even more ancient than the root of the hills. It is by yoga that the divine holds this creation together in his embrace. This is not a metaphor. When we hear Mother's prayer where she says, "I hold the earth in my embrace and a kiss of benediction is laid upon the struggling atom," she is not saying poetry. It's a fact of yogic experience that one can take the whole world within one's own embrace. It's a reversal of the view. If we look at from the little human size, we think universe is an expansion. When we see from the yogic point of view, the universe is the result of God limiting himself. It's not the result of God expanding himself. It's the result of the divine limiting himself. By a process of self-limitation, he becomes this universe. That's how it's written in the Life Divine. Constant, by self-loss, by self-limitation, he becomes this universe which is, we could say, as infinite as it is finite. So limitless. And this is an act of self-concentration, self-limitation, self-loss. So it's by that yoga that he holds this universe together. For yoga literally means to unite. And he holds it in a secret heart of oneness. That takes us to the fundamental mystery of yoga, which Aurobindo repeatedly brings out, and I think this is the central point which all of us need to remember, that yoga is not done by man. Yoga is done by the divine. By yoga he brings out all the possibilities which are involved in matter. By yoga he holds this creation together. By his secret power of yoga, he not only brings out but sustains and dissolves the cycles of creation. It gives a very vast sense to yoga and a very vast sense to the meaning of our lives. Yoga ceases to be just a mechanical process of some breathing techniques and some mantra japa and some occult practices and some even 14-day course in yoga and 2 weeks lessons in nirvana and some kind of psychedelic experiences being labeled as yoga. Whole life, whole creation is an act of yoga. And who is doing this yoga? The divine is doing this yoga. So what is our role? We can do, there is a very beautiful word in Sanskrit, Sah Yoga. The word literally means collaboration. We can collaborate in the process of yoga. We cannot do yoga. To imagine that I can do yoga, we don't even realize what a limited zone of consciousness in which we live. Aurobindo in one of his short passages says, short letters, a veil behind the heart and lid above the mind. This is how we live. Our life is lived in a prison. There's a beautiful line in Savitri where he speaks about this prison. This world is a bondage and a jail. We don't even realize that we live in a jail. And we are very happy living in the jail. We are very happy perpetuating the jail, even making the prison bars thicker and thicker. We don't realize how limited we are. We don't know what is going to take place next moment. This is the colossal ignorance in which we live. And imagine with this puny mind, this little mind, we believe we can measure the infinite, let alone engage ourselves with Him. Our heart is cabined in a very small, narrow idea. It can feel a little emotion and it immediately spills over. Little joy it cannot hold. Little love and it spills over. Little happiness and it begins to anticipate sorrow. What's going to come next? It's difficult. When human beings are happy for quite some time, they start suspecting things. And so do the doctors. Are you okay? You are too happy for too long. So it's strange, we cannot love beyond limits, we cannot be happy beyond limits, we cannot even be peaceful beyond a limited period of time. Everybody likes to sit in Matri Mandir, everybody loves to go to the Samadhi. After half an hour we become restless. We want to come out because even peace tires us. We live in such a small consciousness. And what is that vastness? As I entered, the book of Kingdoms of Greater Knowledge that was opened from Savitri, what a line where silence listens to the rolling of the worlds. Silence listens. And what does it listen? Not our human noise in which we drown ourselves. Worlds after worlds are rolling. Yet the divine becomes so small and limited like us. We speak of the mother, as if she was another person born in so-and-so date and died on so-and-so date. How does Aurobindo describe in Savitri? The ages are the footfall of a tread. And all creation is an endless act. This is not poetry, this is not metaphor. This is a fact of inner life. But when we compare it to the facts of our outer life, we see the great, great difference. So the very first thing we learn when we step into the path of yoga, or we are made to learn, that one cannot do yoga by oneself. It stands to logic actually. Our logical mind can little bit think logically. Aurobindo writes in one of his letters, if the divine is something beyond the mind, because then only yoga becomes meaningful. If the divine is simply like our mind, then he is not worth really achieving. We know what our mind is. But if the divine is something beyond the mind, then what it will do, how will it help if we keep on running all kinds of thought within the mind and think that by thinking we can arrive at him? It's a logical impossibility. And if there is a consciousness beyond the mind, then it stands to reason that that consciousness can lean down and help us and facilitate the whole process of our yogic journey. This is a basic, any simple logic would tell us, it doesn't require a great thought, that if there is a consciousness beyond mind, obviously, if we keep moving in the mind by any amount of mental method, we cannot understand it. The only way to understand is to become that consciousness. And the only utility of mind, truly the utility of mind, is to make an effort to get into that consciousness. And the best effort it can make is to shut up and remain silent. Because that consciousness can then find room and space to enter. This also one learns as one moves on the path of yoga, that the quieter you are, the less you speak about yoga, the more you are engaged in the practice. It grows. And there are no limits to it. There are no halfway homes. It's so easy to remain in one of the halfway homes. In another letter, Sri Aurobindo speaks about, because the word spiritual, often Sri Aurobindo has used the word supramental. And very often, when we speak about yoga, supramental, spiritual, everything appears same because it's quite natural, for us, our mind, everything is the same. Some joy we experience, some peace. Sri Aurobindo speaks of the difference between the spiritual and the supramental, because between this small little mind in which we are shut and that truth consciousness which Sri Aurobindo has brought down to earth and which is working on earth, and we have to prepare ourselves for it. There is a whole zone of consciousness where the grey matter of our brains, one good things the scientists have done are some names they have given. They have very beautifully used the word grey matter, because really our mind always moves in a zone of grey. What we know today, we are not sure of it tomorrow. So it's literally grey. Between this grey and the perfect light, the one light that lights up everything else, there is a zone where greyness becomes less and less and light becomes more and more. And it's so easy. Each of these zones carries its own splendor, its own riches, its own power, its own knowledge, its own certitude, its own ananda. The general term for it is the higher consciousness. And one touch of it and one may easily be led into a delusion that one has touched the supramental. So the second thing or the third thing very important that one learns on this path is to be very, very humble. To never fall into the trap of the voice of the ego declaring itself that I have arrived. There were people even during Sri Aurobindo's time who were saying that I have glimpsed the supramental. And sometimes at one point I used to feel, how can somebody be as foolish as to think, with all the ego that we carry to believe, that one has. But I'm sharing a real life experience. In one of the centers in Delhi, we used to read Sri Aurobindo's writings. And there was a group which used to come and do some kind of healing seances and healing sessions. So one day, some of them were passing by, and one of them asked the master, he had just come for 2 days, this man, as I gathered, that, I have joined the group 2 days back and I see an orange light. And the master told him, oh, that must be the supramental light you are seeing. This now I have heard it with my own ears. And it's amazing, you see, we can fall into such traps. So much humility is required on this path. So much humility. But as Sri Aurobindo has said, there are two things which are infinite. And one is the universe and the other is human stupidity. Even when mother was there in the physical body, there were people who felt and believed they have gone beyond her. And they have now to do things where mother and Aurobindo have left. We have to carry it further. So much humility is required. Tremendous humility. We are before something which is unprecedented, infinite. And that humility actually gives a joy. It gives a joy that there is so much to discover. That's another very beautiful thing about Aurobindo's yoga, which some people take it as a disadvantage, but I feel it's a great advantage. One, it's very, very vast. You can't categorize it into this or that system, you can't fix a method, you can't fix a way. It's very vast. Each one does it in his own way. There are some key principles, but each one does it in his own way. Or in each one, it is done in his own way. That would be more accurate. And the second thing is, you cannot stop at any halfway home. Aurobindo just won't let us stop. When he writes in one of the letters, when someone has obviously asked him about spiritual and the supramental, he says, if the spiritual and the supramental were the same thing, then all that I am speaking of would be odious and useless. This ashram, even as all other ashrams in India and elsewhere, would be chock full of supramental yogis. Aurobindo's words, this ashram as all other ashram would be, and nothing new is really required then. And then he goes on to specify. He doesn't stop there. He says, one can have realization of the self in all things. One can have the experience of the divine everywhere. One can even experience the inner peace, ananda, intuition, all these things. Yet, it is not the supramental. Even to get one of these things is difficult enough for us. Just to experience the self. And then he describes, makes the difference very clear, that these experiences, they enrich our inner consciousness. That is true, because we discover that there is something more than us. It enriches. Now everything else is against the background of that. So it does enrich us in many ways. We know what we have touched, so we know what we miss. Those who have not experienced the inner ananda, of course not the true ananda. True ananda is practically impossible for human consciousness in its present state. But even the touch of the psychic joy, if one has not experienced, there are people who would say, yes, it's each one's way of enjoying life. Some people do yoga, others take to alcohol, and everything is basically happiness. Because the inner reference point is that. But when you have touched this, you know what a great difference, not just in quantity, in quality. Human language is so inadequate. We have to use words which are so familiar. And probably this familiarity is a big bane. Joy, bliss. So we instantly think bliss and joy as we understand. And books are written on how that bliss is same as some of the earthly experiences of joy. Why? Because both are called as blissful experiences. And we write books and theories, but that bliss, that stuff of which this world is made. Human language has distorted everything. So he says all these experiences even one has, they enrich the consciousness. Because even for a moment, if one has experienced this separation from this whole universe, from this time and space, it does help us, because now that is the reference point. Any difficulty, distress, we know this is going to pass away, there is a consciousness greater. Yet, what happens in everyday life, he says, we are still governed by the mental will. We are still moved by the vital joy and sorrows on the surface. The only difference this spiritual consciousness does it, these experiences, that we can learn to separate ourselves. At its utmost, we can live in our inner being. Now these are not small things. To learn to live in the inner being, to enrich that, while the surface life goes on as it is. And there are several theories that people have evolved to explain this surface life. Well, this is karma, this has to go on in its own way. In daily life, you have to deal in its own way. Inwardly, you should be in that peace. And Aurobindo says, yet this is not enough. Even at its best, it is spiritual, it is not supramental. A complete and radical transformation of nature. And what is that? The very stuff of mind is changed into a plenary supramental illumination. We no more think with the thinking machine. Even intuition is insufficient before that light, that splendor which he wants to pour upon us. Our hearts can feel and contain a whole universe of divine love and ananda without spilling it over. Our will becomes informed by the supreme will. It's no more the stumbling and struggling human will. We all know, we decide we should do this or that, and there's no certain way that human beings can know whether this is the thing to be done or not to be done. By any light or standard, that stumbling will can be replaced by the divine puissant will, which not only knows but achieves what it wants because it has seen it. It can cut through the entire maze of forces. That is the imperative supramental consciousness. We lack that certitude. And then he goes on to say even the physical consciousness, the constitution, can at its peak, as an ultimate crown or end result, be so full of that decay, disease, disorder, and death becomes an impossibility. So this is the big journey, not just some self-realization or some inner experiences, some visions, some voices, some joy, some peace, but something unprecedented. It's an enormous program. And that is why all the more, even normal yogas are difficult to be done by our own effort. Supramental yoga is impossible to be done by one's own effort. But one can try. Aurobindo is that way, he gives freedom, try it, no problem. So, what is the central secret of this yoga? We all know that famous letter of Aurobindo, to remain psychically open to the mother. She does the yoga, we have to be open and receive. Sounds very simple. But then the problem is at the other end also. If the question was just to pierce through this zone, in fact Aurobindo makes a distinction. There is a practical distinction between higher nature and the lower nature. This is a practical distinction. It's necessary at our level of evolution. Otherwise, all is divine. This is very vast. And we may end up saying that all life is yoga, so whether I drink or smoke or take to drugs, it's yoga. Because ultimately divine is behind all things. But we have to identify not with the divine in the lower nature, but with the divine in his own self-nature. Not the way that higher nature has become this, but this has to become that. So this is the difference. Divine is on all things, he's everywhere. If you read the beautiful Aurobindo's poem, Ahana, where he describes the mother at all levels, even the augur, the demoness, everything is divine. If you go to its essence, it has something of the divine. But we have not to identify with the divine in the lower nature, but with the divine in the higher nature. Not only identify in some moments of luminous trance when we sit in our quietude and we peer through the vault, this thick skull. Children have little opening in their skull. Probably nature's indication that what we must become at the end of the journey. But as we grow up, this are sealed. Nature's problem to be solved. And the veil within the heart, if they can be pierced, we have some glimpse in some luminous moments, can experience some ecstasy, some touch of the psychic joy, even of the psychic sorrow. And we can pierce to the skull and have those moments. But to live that reality in everyday life. So this is the essence of yoga. I think we'll have some kind of interaction. I just flow with the inspiration and forget the interaction part. So let me just read a passage of Sri Aurobindo and then we can have the interaction. It's a sharing session, and I'm sorry I keep forgetting, and to forgive me for that. This, of course, from the synthesis, and it's beautiful. All yoga is in its nature a new birth. All yoga is in its nature a new birth. It is a birth out of the ordinary, the mentalized material life of man into a higher spiritual consciousness and a greater and diviner being. No yoga can be successfully undertaken and followed unless there is a strong awakening to the necessity of that larger spiritual existence. Yoga is not a part-time job. It's a 24/7 engagement. It's not a hobby. Like people write hobbies, column. One of them is painting, dancing, music, yoga. So yoga is not a hobby. The acceptance of a new spiritual idea force and upward orientation in the being, an illumination, a turning or conversion seized on by the will and the heart's aspiration. The mind, the will, the heart must be fired with this zeal that this is the thing to be done. This is the momentous act which contains as in a seed all the results that the yoga has to give. There's a beautiful line in Savitri, a prayer, a master act, a king idea. This is the master act, the momentous act, inner act. The mere idea or intellectual seeking of something higher beyond, however strongly grasped by the mind's interest, is ineffective unless it is seized on by the heart as the one thing desirable. To all of us, Shubham is telling us, we like to use yoga as an information. Okay, let me read a book on yoga. Next I read something which Stephen Hawking has written. Then I compare what he has written compared to the book of yoga and create a mishmash and write a new book on science and yoga, the 21st millennium. And that becomes a bestseller. So that kind of intellectual activity doesn't help. So he's telling us it has to be seized by the heart as the one thing desirable, and by the will as the one thing to be done. For truth of spirit has not to be merely thought, but to be lived. And to live it demands a unified single-mindedness of the being. When someone asks Aurobindo about the difficulties of yoga, he says they come for everybody and there is only one purpose and reason why they come. It is because we are divided. And all of them come to unify us. They come to show us where we are divided. So they come to show us where is our allegiance to lower nature and how far is our allegiance to the yoga. So, single-mindedness of the being, so great a change. It's the sublimest of adventure. It's really a joy to be even called upon the path. Leave aside to walk the path. Just to be called is such a joy. If we can be just grateful that the divine handpicked just to reveal that there is a path. He'll carry us with the finger. Just to know that there is this wideness beyond and before is so liberating. So he says, So great a change as is contemplated by the yoga is not to be effected by divided will or by a small portion of the energy or by hesitating mind. Should I, shouldn't I? Forever one remains one step in the water, then one step on the shore and keeps. So mother says, plunge. And she says, you should be willing to hang with nothing but the thread of faith. That's yoga, to take the plunge. So great a change as is contemplated by the yoga is not to be affected by divided will or by small portion of the energy or by hesitating mind. He who seeks the divine must consecrate himself to God and to God only. So this is the background of the yoga. And then of course a whole lot of processes, inner processes primarily, which relate to each part of a being, to our thought, what should we do to our thoughts, what should we do to our feelings, what should we do with our will, what should we do with our bodies, which I think we'll subsequently share and discuss. But anything now, anything you would like to add and share, it would be beautiful. About the aim, the goal, because other things of course are very vast which we'll be coming up with. Just about the aim and the goal of the yoga, the supramental change.
I have one question about the inner will. Is the divine will? Inner will.
Inner will. Inner will at a human level is the human will. Will is always an inner process. It's a human will. To know the divine will, one has to, this will at the surface gets scattered because of the desire. It's like a flame which, because of the storm of desire, gets scattered. So on the surface it takes the form of a desire will which is running after this or that object. Now to get back to the true will, we have to first quieten this rumbling and fumbling and stumbling of the desire self. So Sri Aurobindo speaks about that there is a true soul and there is a surface desire soul. Unless that is quieted, we cannot really get at the true human will itself. Now this true will, once we get at that by quietening the desire, then we can orient it to the divine. Now what that does is, every activity is consecrated, turned upward. In practical terms, it means the divine comes before everything else. In very practical terms, whenever there is a choice to be made, ideally the true will would tell us that, look, if you do this, it takes you closer to the divine. If you do this, it takes you further away. It's a very simple test, very practical test, which means to get rid of preferences also. It's not an easy task. It's a very lifetime of effort. And of course it has to be assisted by the divine will itself from behind. As he says that behind all these stumbling, the divine will leads us through all the chaos, sometimes our human will has to learn the hard way. Not sometimes it walks the simple way, most of the time it learns the hard way. But when it has sufficiently quietened this surface movement of desire, and when we have got rid of the ego sense, then we can become aware of the supreme will. And in the synthesis it comes towards the end, and there he speaks of how the supreme will can manifest itself as a sudden inspiration which rises from within, as an illumination from above. It carries its own certitude and the power of action. But before that, equanimity is a first preliminary condition. Till then, whatever will we are experiencing is yet a human will. And in us humans, it's terribly mixed with desire. Terribly mixed. It's like entangled.
Thank you. You were, if I understood correctly, you take this moment of conversion, of self-consecration, but this is the moment when you first set foot on the path. And this is a sign that there's been a divine touch.
Yes. Aspiration, conscious aspiration, cannot awaken unless there is a divine touch. One cannot come to the path, if one may say so, unless there is the divine will. This is a very well-known truth actually, not only in Aurobindo's yoga, but a truth of yoga, that one cannot set foot on the path unless he has already been called. And Aurobindo confirms that no one can, enter. It's a very ancient truth. Many are called, few are chosen. All this, they are beautiful ways of expressing the same truth, that if we have an aspiration for the divine, it means the divine is already touched and called us. Now, how long it will take, many times the aspiration awakens, but the rest of the nature is not ready. So one falls back into the old ways, one has to go through much painful experiences, commits much errors and blunders. Yet the touch has been received. So one returns again and again to that point. So this does happen, and there are a number of people in whose life this is a reality. But aspiration cannot awaken. The sign of conscious aspiration, the fact of conscious aspiration is a sign that the divine will is behind it. In fact, Aurobindo has asked us to always remember. In one of the letters he says that you should always remember in all periods of darkness and despondency that it is he who has called you to the path. Outwardly it looks that we have come to the path. But inner truth is that he who has called us to the path, and he is very responsible, he is not like us. So thankfully. So first commitment is from his side to take us through. If we collaborate, it's easier. That's the difference. Yes.
This gentleman would like to ask this question in French.
Yes. Yeah, please.
Vous me renvoyez à un terrible défi.
You are throwing me a terrific challenge, a tremendous challenge.
Parce que si j'ai bien saisi l'articulation, il y aurait d'une part la quête spirituelle qui, elle, se passe une référence, peut se passer une référence à la mer et à Dieu.
There's a spiritual framework which requires us to pass through the mother towards God. Is that so? You had expressed it like this.
Et au niveau de la quête spirituelle, il me vient à l'esprit tout le travail de Krishnamurti, par exemple, qui a affirmé « J'ai parlé pendant 50 ans et personne n'a réalisé ce que j'ai dit. »
Yes.
Déjà au niveau du spirituel.
So he says that there are other great teachers, like for example Krishnamurti, who said,
Yes.
I've been speaking for 50 years and so far nobody has realized even this spiritual truth.
Yes.
Et Aurobindo a dit, mon yoga commence là où s'arrêtent les autres yogas.
Yes.
Aurobindo has said, my yoga begins where the others stop.
Yes. So there are several things together. I'll not make comment on the Krishnamurti part of it because each yoga is specialized in its own way, and Krishnamurti's his way, or the way that he said he is not a teacher, and yet I understand the frame in which the question is. The path of knowledge, or also it's a reframing of the Buddhist way in modern context. So many ways to look at Jiddu's path. But essentially it requires that all flames should eventually be abandoned so that one can plunge into that which is beyond all flames. So at some point even the teacher becomes an obstacle. In the traditional ways, this is a traditional path of jnana, this is a known thing. Jnana uses this. Here, to begin with, it's a different goal altogether. It's to embody that infinity in finite space. So if the goal was to plunge into the infinite, at one point one has to really abandon everything and plunge into that and be done with all things. Because even the manifestation of God is a manifestation, and manifestation cannot be greater than eventually. I mean, that's a logical contradiction there. But if the goal is to embody that infinity in finite space, you cannot do away with the gate. It's through that it comes, and it facilitates the embodiment. That is one part of it. Second, actually we are carried away by the physical form. That mother, when we look at her, she's a form and she's very much like us. And so always in the human mind this kind of thing may come that, well, we can do it, one has to, is this right, we are going through a passage, eventually one has to leave that and go further. I don't know, I mean that's how I'm looking at the question, because this question somehow didn't occur to me. When I first saw her, I thought, it came that she is divine and that was the end of the journey. But I can understand the difficulty. But if we look at it from another standpoint, the embodiment is basically a means to make that consciousness easily available to us, more accessible to us. Otherwise, we cannot even conceive the infinite. So, from the divine's point of view, he becomes human and limits himself to a human form and shape, because our outer consciousness can come in contact through that outer consciousness and enter into the infinity. So it becomes easier. Like supposing you don't have any form, any symbol, any name, anything, and we were to conceive of some absolute infinite inside and discover it. Now you see, the moment you discover, the moment you get in contact with that, and if you are aware of it, for instance, how are you aware of nirvana? How can one be aware of nirvana? It's a state where consciousness is annulled. So it's, human mind cannot grasp it. It cannot experience it. It's not within the frame of our reference, all our references. So the coming of a teacher is to facilitate that process. It helps in that process for us humans to, even in ordinary life, even to learn physics, even to learn mathematics, it helps if there is a teacher. When we talk of something as vast as the spiritual and the supramental, a teacher is definitely a great facilitator. Now, as far as in this yoga is concerned, as I've been saying, that she embodies that truth which is not available to human beings, and human beings can try it by their own. There is no bar that one cannot do it on one's own, because surrender is the most courageous act in this world, very courageous. At the same time, it's the commonest act that we all do. For instance, when we say that, we're talking about the frame and the gate, that I don't wish to go through the mother and surrender to her, basically it means I surrender to my logical thinking mind. It means that, if we go to its essence, to the bottom of the problem. Because to me that is the path. It can also mean at a deeper level, I surrender to my present constitution, which I believe is capable of arriving at that. I believe that my present effort, formation can do it. And one can proceed like that. It's not that Aurobindo said that you cannot try it. But knowing the yoga, and especially because this yoga passes through many uncharted territories. It's not one of those fixed paths like Jnana Yoga. Jnana Yoga is relatively simple. Whatever arises, you say not this. So any appearance, even the appearance of godly beings, you eventually not this. So at the end of it, you enter into that state of emptiness. But here it's not a state of emptiness. Here is a state of new fullness. Now there is a danger of this yoga because the new things which may come, unless one has developed that degree of discrimination, there are many masquerades which can come and they can mask themselves as divine forces, divine beings, higher nature. And there are many people who have walked the path, who have not followed surrender and have been led astray. Because this cosmos is full of forces about which we have no idea, menacing energies which can really assume a divine form. And Sri Aurobindo speaks about them in synthesis, speaks about them in letters. And in fact, there is a whole plane, the vital world, where he says that where death walks wearing the robe of deathless life. So it's very easy to fall into a big trap and believe that one is in a state of yoga. Therefore, when one has surrendered, the path becomes A, easier, B, shorter, C, swifter, D, safer, and most of all, delightful. So, but one can make a choice. So there is no, each one has to find his own being and its call and cry. It should not be made into a... Second, spiritual is not a new frame. Spiritual actually is constantly breaking of the frames. This is the traditional path. You break the frames and eventually go into that. So when we speak of the mother as the way, it is not to, in a religious sense, that she is the way in that sense. That one says that if anybody is doing anything else is doing something wrong and one has to, but for this yoga, if one wants this yoga, then this is the best way and probably the only way that is there for this yoga. But one has to see one's own calling. It's a challenge. It's a challenge. It's a double challenge. It's a challenge because it's an invitation into infinite adventure. This yoga doesn't have a fixed end point because it's a process of evolution. So it's a challenge. And it's very beautiful because, as human beings, we love to take challenges. It's a double challenge because we have to make the great act of surrender. Very challenging. To human individuality is the most difficult thing. So it is a challenge.
You are talking about prayer, a master act, kingly idea, all these things. But
please be seated.
Prayer, right from the childhood, we have been brought up in the traditional manner which any Hindu families are having. And we know very well the avatars who are preaching, who are there before and sang songs, they are merged in the Almighty. And we also know that is not enough. We have to transcend all these things to higher level. But still, that has got a very big hold on it because we have been brought up in the traditions. So I am just wondering whether we can totally eliminate it and coming to this type of
So, just as Sri Aurobindo said, ego is the helper, ego is the bar. One can say tradition is a helper, tradition is a bar. Because that's very true, what you say. Tradition helps at one level, but it also limits us. It's very true. About prayer, Sri Aurobindo says something very interesting. He says it should rise on the crest of emotion. You see, that's the difference between mechanical prayer. And there are several kinds of prayers. I have images about prayers. One image is of a crow chasing something. It goes, I visualize prayer as birds. So crow, it goes, picks up, hesitates, comes back, picks up, hesitates. Now that is one kind of prayer, done with a very hesitating mind, which is full of fear, doubt, etc. It is as ineffective as a crow unless one perseveres like a crow. So that is a crow prayer. Other prayer is the prayer of the kingfisher. Very concentrated, very pointed, but for something low. It is looking for a fish in the water. Third prayer is prayer of the vulture, soaring in the sky, but wanting a piece of meat. But the most beautiful prayer. Then of course another bird, parrot, speaks like humans, understands not a word of it. And the most beautiful prayer I visualize like a swan. Swan will not, it is said that, it only wants to eat, its food is in a lotus you have that thing in the center, it's very tasty. Swan eats only that. It lives in Manasarovar or in those areas and it flies with such a beauty and majesty. So I feel the best prayer is that prayer which arises like a swan from the depth of our soul, goes straight to its heights. But since that's not common to human consciousness, it's good at least to know through a parrot that there is something like prayer. But to remain stuck in the parrot is dangerous. Parrot remains in a cage precisely because it can speak like humans. So this is just a kind of analogies which have often. So prayer to be really effective. One, it should be true. It should be a genuine need. It should rise on the crest of an emotion. The arth, in the Indian system you have this artharthi, distress call. It should be real to a living presence. It's not that I have prayed, I don't know whether actually there is a God or not, whether He is heard or not. And when we relate with the Divine as a living presence, at least I am sure it must be experience of many of us. It is always, 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 always heard. It is also always answered. Sometimes the answer is not to our liking. That is the difference. Because we want things to happen the way we want it, and sometimes when the Divine has heard our prayer, we say, this fellow is up to this mischief. So it's always good to pray, even for worldly things, because the Divine knows that you are looking for it. So He says, very good, I am going to teach you now what it means. So He sometimes grants us our prayers so that we learn the lesson through that. Sometimes He rejects the prayer, that is His answer. And it's hard to say which is a greater love. In Savitri there is a line, heaven's wiser love rejects the mortal's prayer. So, but yet we must pray. And something very beautiful Mother says about prayer and aspiration. She says aspiration does not require faith in a divine being. You can aspire, even anybody can aspire. Aspiration simply entails that there is something, that's all. But prayer implies a two-way contact. So, for somebody who is more tuned like a bhakta, prayer comes more naturally and therefore it helps. It adds a special intensity and flavor to aspiration. Whereas to a person who is more, knowledge oriented or, just aspiration comes more easily. But prayer always helps. If aspiration can be touched by the prayer, it gives a concrete form and it helps definitely. So, but yes, I agree that traditions have a problem also. And the only way we can forget everything, not only tradition, everything else, is to adopt a very simple rule. That rule is a complete fidelity and dependence on the way. I look at it in a very simple way, not in a very complex way. I am a doctor. So when I learnt medicine, my teacher told me this bone is, humerus. Now I didn't go into debate with the teacher that humerus means, literally it means this, and why do you call it humerus? Well, my teacher could tell me, but I learned all this, and that was the path to become a good doctor, the principle. Now, after learning, I can make my own discoveries and variations. So, I feel that if one takes to a path, one should be sincere and committed. This is fidelity. I'll give you an example. It may sound very strange, but it's like, as a doctor, I followed it. I am supposed to give vaccinations. Now one day I read a sentence from Aurobindo. Vaccination is based on a dark and dangerous principle. Now all my medical knowledge is put to a challenge. To me the choice was very simple. If Aurobindo says so, that's the end of the world. So I decided that as far as I am concerned, I don't do this vaccination. But there was in my mind, normally you understand why he has said things. Dark and dangerous principle, but what is that principle he has not mentioned? So you also want to know what is it behind. Now please don't quote me as being against vaccination, because it's my personal way. It's not necessary that anybody should. The moment it should be everybody's way, then it's a religion. I'm not saying that, just sharing. It's a sharing session. Very interestingly, within an year's time, as a revelation, the entire thing came across that yes, it is a dark and dangerous principle. Then strangely, articles started coming without my searching. Now I don't search the net for any of this information. They started coming from here, there, everywhere on the problems and the issues involved. So to me it was very clear. It was like a confirmation. So if Aurobindo has said something, if Mother has said something, we have faith in that and we follow that. Now, true, we cannot always live up to that standard. To recognize it that I am not able to do the way I am expected to be is one kind of sincerity, to recognize one's own insincerity. But danger is when we summarily dismiss and say that, well, no, that's not, there is a new way, there is a different way. People have done all kinds of dangerous things, and if you read, it's amazing what kind of things people have done. I can't even, speak about them, and in the name of Mother and Aurobindo's yoga. So it's good to have that faith and follow it. They have given everything like a child. It makes the journey so beautiful because they know the way. If I know the way, I would be a master and not a disciple. To me, everything is new. So it's always beautiful. After all, for whom they have given, for all of us. So we read it and we try to put into practice with complete trust and surrender. It makes it so easy and natural. Yes.
You were saying that this is a very difficult yoga, and we do not have a guru. Can you give some just small comfort and guidance?
The biggest comfort is that when Mother was asked, what do you mean when you say that you have initiated someone into the yoga? The Mother gave a one-line reply. When I say I have initiated someone, it means I have revealed myself to that person. Now if you really look at it, it's very simple. Just as we saw the Mother with her naked eyes and people felt she's divine, people felt she's human, people felt she's this, that, all kinds of things. Similarly now, some of us naturally awaken to the sense that she is divine. This cannot come unless she has initiated. There is no way, no mentally logical way. We cannot convince anyone, and it should not be done, because then it becomes a dogma. The moment this revelation comes from inside, it's not based on any logic. If you see logic, well, her life is there, she was a French by birth and early education, all that we have read, and she did this, that, occultism. But this revelation that in our inner consciousness we accept Mother and Sri Aurobindo as the master cannot happen unless they have initiated us and touched us. Which means we carry them as gurus still inside. And if we are ready, this happens. And the moment that happens, we can say that they are leading us. Now, yes, I understand that we could write the letter and a reply could come. It has its pluses, it has its minuses. It's not always safe to have that kind of guru often replies like that, because it can, after all, our consciousness always receives the way it wants to pick up things. So there are people who Sri Aurobindo wrote letters and they interpreted it in their own way. And they went around saying, Sri Aurobindo has said this and showed that letter. These are real instances. So the joke of the whole thing is that eventually, ultimately it becomes an inner process, because even when the divine writes and sends us, it is the recipient consciousness. If it is open, it gets the right meaning. If it is not open, it is misled. If it is open and receptive, it will get the right guidance anyways. Maybe through a book, maybe through a person, maybe just it's open and somebody says something. So we have to be now, more rooted in the psychic. That is true, number one. Number two, the problem is when the mother is in a physical body, a lot of physical problems of this external life she could take upon herself. That difference is definitely there, that humanity has to probably go through more blows. Doesn't matter, a few more hammering here and there. Whereas the physical body serves as a shield, because we all belong to the old creation, and she took it upon herself, all the blows that otherwise would come directly to the children. Even now, if we can make the act of complete surrender, that's possible. But now we have to do it very consciously. What was done by the very fact that she just said yes. One could do away and get away with anything. But that's okay. That's a small price to be paid. But they are there as masters, they are leading us, and if within my consciousness I accept Sri Aurobindo and the mother as the master, it means that they have accepted us. This is the whole process of yoga. And this is not based on just my saying, it's what they have said very clearly. He who chooses the infinite has been chosen by the infinite. So that's how one has to take it.
From what I'm hearing, there seems to be what is known in Christianity as predetermination. The divine will decide who, and we cannot decide in spite of our efforts. Is that so?
Yes, for yoga, probably it's absolutely so, and this is a grace. It is not to be seen in a sense that, it's not a candidature. It's a grace that not everybody is ready, and if prematurely we pull anyone, and Sri Aurobindo, there are letters of Sri Aurobindo where he says, do not pull people on the path. Because one has to be ready for this adventure. It's a very great adventure, sublimest of adventure, the most difficult and challenging of efforts. And it's a 24/7 effort, and it has its own difficulties, pitfalls, snares, and unless one is called, that call is an inner call, of course. It's very, very dangerous. It's better to be prepared, go through a period of preparation, doesn't matter. Period of preparation may mean reading Mother and Sri Aurobindo's books, reading other books, having some kind of belief, visiting places, going to Samadhi and going down, coming to Matri Mandir, meditating. These are preparatory phases. It's necessary, because human consciousness has to be prepared for that. But yoga is when the call comes, and definitely it is decided by the divine, and that is because not everybody is ready to go through the rigors of yoga. It's a new birth, and all birth implies a labor pain, and this birth implies far greater labor pain, because ego has held us from every side. It's the very stuff of our being. We are stuck in the weeds of desire endlessly, At every step we are ensnared, and then there are cosmic forces to add to our already heavy burden. So if one doesn't have the calling, it's quite possible that one can be very, very badly wounded or stuck. And Sri Aurobindo and the mother, there are a number of stories where they discourage this kind of thing. And if, even when people used to apply to come to the ashram, they were asked to wait many times for years. And there is a very interesting story, about this readiness. It's an inner thing. It has nothing to do with just knowing and reading. So there was this gentleman who was very impressed reading Sri Aurobindo's writings, and he wanted to come to the ashram. And Sri Aurobindo, he did not get reply. Normally the reply would come. So after a few years, he asked one of the disciples, and the over-enthusiastic disciple said, "It's okay, you come, whoever comes, ultimately mother will accept, don't worry, you come." So he was so impressed. So he came. Now he came and he was waiting in one of the guest houses because the norm was that you have to send a message, and then the secretary would come, Nolnida, and some place would be given to him. So he has come unannounced. While he is waiting in the guest house, he looks at one of the pictures. And what does he see there? He sees a picture from the frescoes of Ajanta. So he's looking at it, he says, how can this be here? This is a place of yoga. And he goes into a great mental turmoil. Even before the secretary comes, he walks away. You see, he was going through very beautifully, reading and preparing for the yoga. When the time would have come, he would have opened so well. Now, it adds to a complication. There are numerous instances. And so it's very, very important that while at one level, yoga should be generalized in humanity. This is true. At another level, people should not be ever pulled into the path. It's very dangerous. So it's very true. And definitely Christianity, like all great traditions, it's a very great tradition, has many deep truths in it. One of them is this.
What is the dangerous?
What is the
Dangerous.
danger? Every step is a danger.
Yeah.
Yes, because the danger is of the vital coloring and painting everything. The danger is the ego clinging and giving a kind of facade. The danger is from the cosmic forces, the adverse forces, the hostile forces. The danger is from the spiritual and divine forces. Even that Sri Aurobindo says. Even they can come to take you away from the path. So it's full of, because we are face to face with the cosmos in yoga. We are no more confined to our little self and our little life. The effort is worth the trouble, that's true. But it is true that at every step there is a pitfall and a snare. And that's why Sri Aurobindo says each inch gained is a victory because it's a battle. So there is, and instead of being disheartened, actually, one should look at it from another point. At least that's how I look at it. That wow, wonderful, it's challenging. If the path, at another level you take it as a challenge. And to remember that when the divine is with you, the victory is sure. But what may happen on the way, Mother herself has said, she never hid anything. You see, she never tried to over-popularize yoga by saying, you come and I will carry you in my arms. And she said that it's an adventure, and what may happen to you tomorrow, I do not know. She has used these words. The victory is certain. But definitely, and one should go with full eyes open. Then there is a chance of sincerity coming in. Otherwise, at the first, masquerade, one is laid away and, one can just, and to have the will to go through the very end, it's a joy, it doesn't matter. So that's why it's very important to always remember that she is doing the yoga and she is with us. It makes the path a lot more easier, safer and delightful. Because then the divine stands by our side and takes upon oneself many, many difficulties which otherwise would take lifetimes to overcome. So while in human beings, it's true that at one level human beings are meant for yoga, it's also true that within us nothing is ready for yoga, and that's the contradiction in which we live. Yeah. So next week, yes.
We can continue.
Yes, we'll continue. It's a very vast journey. So. Thank you.
Thank you.